feeling? Thank you for asking. I'm feeling a little, I'm excited to be here. I'm still processing, I think we all are, Allison's talk this morning, which was so powerful, right? And deeply felt and emotional. And I'm not going to talk, well, I'm going to talk about emotions, but I'm going to try to connect with the other part of the brain today. But how wonderful that you all get to spend a day thinking about communication and connection. And I just want to thank Bill Wolf and Dave Walls and everyone at LaSalle for creating a space for all of us to kind of come together and get out of our kind of day-to-day, which is really hectic, and I know for you guys particularly hectic and heavy, and to come here and connect and think about our work and the importance of our work in different ways, right? So it's really exciting. I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to be in Albany for the first time. Really beautiful city. The architecture is amazing, and I live in Chicago, so I know a little something about architecture. So the problem that I'm going to address this afternoon is this. Because this is kind of where we're at right now in the world, in America, right? We have effectively retreated to our ideological corners. If you think about what's happening in Washington, D.C., what's happening in a lot of our state houses, what's happening at the local level, it's a lot of partisan bickering, not a lot of connection or communication or understanding. And that's why things happen like happened yesterday. And what I'm going to talk about later is what we can do long term to help the public understand what we do and why it matters. So I am from the National Human Services Assembly. It's the national membership organization for all of the federated organizations that work on health and human services. So you know, United Way Worldwide, Volunteers in America, Girls Incorporated, Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCA. So they have about 70 members based in DC. And the board and the membership of this organization over the last several years has just been lamenting the fact that there have been these deep and relentless funding cuts to health and human services at the national level, but also at the state and the local level too, right? And that, coupled with flat charitable giving over the last 2 decades, has left all of you on your organizations without the resources you need to address the increasingly complex problems facing your communities. Am I right? Doesn't it feel that way? And so we feel this especially acutely in Illinois right now, where we have been without a budget for 2 years. And so human services organizations are literally not being funded, but still doing their work, which I'm sure you're all familiar with that paradigm. So they wanted to think about, well, so they were kind of talking about, is there something wrong with the way we're communicating? Because it doesn't seem to be connecting. It doesn't seem to be resonating, no matter what we say or how we say it, how pithy or interesting our little tagline is or our elevator speech. It doesn't seem to matter at the end of the day because services continue to be cut. So what they did was they decided to take a research-based approach to communications, and they engaged the Frameworks Institute, funded by the Kresge Foundation out of Detroit and Annie Casey in Baltimore. And the Frameworks Institute is interesting. They're a nonprofit think tank. They are a multidisciplinary group with a multi-method approach to communication. So they are on staff cultural anthropologists, political scientists, psychologists, sociologists, and communicators. And they look at communications from kind of two perspectives. One, just generally as a culture, how do we create and tell stories about who we are as Americans? And then they look at the individual level to understand, like look at neuroscience, so kind of piggybacking on what Allison talked about this morning a little bit differently, but they look at neuroscience and understand, well, how do our brains process information? how is it possible to change someone's mind? It's not. And we try to do that all the time. So I'm gonna talk about that. So the first thing that Frameworks does whenever they're considering a new issue is they go out and they try to assess kind of what is the current state of understanding about this issue. So they've worked on climate change, they've worked on early childhood, they've worked on juvenile justice, and now they were working on human services for us. So the first phase of research is to go out into the public and ask them, what do you know about human services? And Allison mentioned this morning. They would literally go into a few cities around the country, walk up to somebody with a Starbucks gift card. These are the kind of people I run away from in the street in Chicago. And say, do you have 10 minutes to talk to me? And surprisingly, people have actually invested a lot of time in this. And so I'm going to show you a short video. It's just about less than 2 minutes. And it really encapsulates what we heard from the public about the work that you do. And it informed kind of how we are designing what we are recommending you talk about going forward. So I want you to watch this video, take it in, and then after it's over, I'm going to ask you to tell me what you heard.
Why do you think that some people have more difficult lives than others?
Some people make their lives more difficult by the decisions that they make.
Individual choices.
The amount of work that you put in, I think.
Effort, motivation.
Some people, I think, make their own trouble.
People don't understand mostly is that what you do now affects later.
Wherever you end up, wherever you are at the time is a result of how much work that you invest.
They should also try and help themselves too. I think they shouldn't try and play the victim card.
Everybody has the option to change their destiny, and you have the power to have it better.
People have to help themselves.
A lot of it has to do with the situation of their parents, who you know, how much money you have.
A lot of it's about money.
Low wages. Sometimes when you've lived in debilitating environments, you don't have a hope for support, and so you don't go after it.
You heard the phrase human services?
No.
Human services?
No,
Have
I
you heard
never
that
heard
phrase?
of it.
Is that a general term? Yeah, I'm not entirely sure.
Human services?
Yeah.
We all serve each other.
The phrase human services pertains to people helping people.
Handing out food, clothes, different things.
Well, I do know they have the food.
They're always giving away food and supporting people in that way, I think.
For people who are not doing really well, like they don't have a place to live.
Very kind people.
There are people out there that are less fortunate than myself.
Charity organizations to help those that can't.
Healthcare for the homeless, or just the food kitchens.
If they're in a tough time, maybe money to help them get over whatever it is that they're trying to get through.
Surprise! What'd you hear? You got exactly right, that food. So the public does not understand what you do. When they can kind of be led there, they really think of it very narrowly. Food, clothing, and shelter. Which is a huge problem because I don't think any of you work on food, clothing, and shelter, right? But you're in the human services sector. What else did you hear? Yes, individualism. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. This is the biggest barrier we have in this country to communicating the work we do, why it matters, and why the public should support it. No question. And unfortunately, we often invoke that belief the way we design our communications, and I'll talk about that. Exactly, a lot of othering. So the public does not see themselves in our communication. So as part of the first phase of this project, we did like kind of an audit of our members' communications, and the public really doesn't see themselves as people who benefit from human services, even though we know everybody does, right?
People think that people have failure in their life because they're not working hard enough.
That's exactly right. So if you're struggling, if you need help getting permanent housing, if you need mental health support, it's mostly because of lack of willpower, bad choices, or, and I was talking about this yesterday with Dave, my least favorite word right now, which is a lack of grit. Which I'm so tired of hearing about. Like, if you just have more grit, you know, you could get out of this hole that you're in. What do they think about all you guys? Oh, yes, right there in the yellow.
Just thinking there's no acknowledgement of multi-generational poverty or institutional racism.
Yes. Yes.
Like I said necessarily, but
no, you're right. No understanding of the broader context. And we're going to talk about that, how critical it is that we start pulling the broader context into our communications, which we don't do a very good job of.
I think they had a lot of stigma.
A lot of what?
Like stigma, like judgment.
Yes. Lots of judging, lots of othering, lots of, I would say, condescension towards people who need help. And there's a reason for that. What was the word they used to describe your organizations? Did you catch that? Charity. So that's like kind of an early 20th century term, kind of ascribed to our organizations. And it was this model of, kind of the benevolent father figure. Like, oh, I'm going to give you, I have money and resources. I'm going to give this poor person living on the street some money because it makes me feel better.
Nice people.
Right. So you guys, exactly. So the public generally thinks that you guys are all doing this work out of the goodness of your hearts. What's the problem with that? We don't have to pay you. You're essentially volunteers, right? So one of the big goals of the new frame for human services, we're going to talk about in a minute, is to elevate your sector, to elevate the health and human services sector so that it's seen as equally important and valuable to a thriving society as the public sector and the private sector, and you should be paid accordingly. Right? I mean, how many of you in here went to college? Master's degree. PhD. I know. Who wants to go through that, right? Still. Exactly. Guess who's still paying off her law degree? I mean, I hear you. So we have to shift. Really, like Bill was saying earlier, we want to disrupt how the public currently thinks about us so that they will value us and invest in the work that we do. And this helps in many ways, and you guys know this. It helps with retention, it helps with attracting the right people, and so this is really critical component of the new frame for human services. So in the first phase of the research, we published the reports on our website, and Brainworks Institute mapped the gaps between what the experts, what you guys know to be true, because they talk to the experts in the field as well, versus what the public believes about human services and human needs. And these are the gaps that the new frame is designed to bridge. This is just a few of them that I just want to call out, and we kind of talked about them already, but when we ask, you guys know that the scope of human services is very broad, right? It's not just direct service. I mean, a lot of you, even if you don't do food, clothing, shelter, you're still doing, a lot of you, direct service. But the sector also does advocacy, research, prevention. The public does not see prevention as a part of the work that we do with. It's invisible to them. And this is not a big surprise, right? Because these are the things, prevention, advocacy, research, those are the things that are the hardest time getting funded, right? Because people don't get it. Oh, wait, what? Why do you do that? I don't understand. So, but the public just sees direct services, temporary aid for the needy. Like, I never want to hear that phrase again. Okay? Say that? Oh, I know. Oh, trust me. I had so many arguments with this about Staff on the Hill. And we absolutely need to rename, rethink some of the names of federal programs. No question. No question. This is a long-term communication strategy. It is. And because think about it, the stuff that you heard in that video, those are beliefs that have been established over generations. They're not going to go away overnight. Not going to go overnight. So, but when we talk about, well, why do some people need help at different points in their life? Or why might someone need help their entire life, right? You guys understand, in fact, you already mentioned it. It's typically because systems are breaking down. There's systemic racism, systemic injustice. There's a much broader context for why many people struggle. It's not what the public thinks, which is individual failings. And so then we talk about, well, who is responsible? This is hugely important whenever we design a communications to explain our work, and especially if we're talking about a problem that we want solved, we always want to make clear who's responsible for solving the problem. We don't often do that. That's important in engaging our audience. And so you guys understand that there's a very broad kind of civic responsibility, right? Our sector has a major role, of course, so does the public sector, and so does the private sector. And all those sectors have to be working together collectively, right? But if the public believes that if the individual is causing their own problem, then they're solving it. It's their problem, they should fix it. And then when we talk about, well, who benefits? And I was thinking about this a lot last night and this morning, listening to Allison and listening, all the kind of lost potential of people who suffer from ACEs and don't get the help that they need. Right, so so we asked experts in the field, well, who benefits from the work that you do? Who benefits? Duh. Everybody benefits. So, but the public believes that it's just that one, whoever got that aid, got that food, got that clothing, got that therapy, got that health care, got Medicaid, they're the only ones that benefit. This is hugely important because this is a theme running throughout the public discourse today, the makers versus the takers, which I think we're all really tired of. And the way to inoculate against that, to move on from that, is to be very clear in our communications, everybody benefits from this program. And there's really creative ways to do that, to see beyond the immediate outcome and the immediate person that you're serving. So these are some of the gaps. So when, the man the street interview that you saw, so we also did focus groups and some other things to kind of really capture what the public understood about human services, and here was the top answer. Make America great again. I always get feedback after I speak, like, Ilsa, you really should be less political. I'm trying. I am really trying. Okay, so the public does not know what human services is. This is called a cognitive hole. What we do with cognitive holes is we don't kind of become naturally curious. We just fill it with our existing beliefs. So this is something else this is a real challenge for us. I'm going to talk about, again, how to navigate around that. The big problem that we heard, we also asked the sector, we asked the experts in the field, you guys, what do you think is the biggest challenge or biggest kind of communications challenge facing the sector? And this is what we heard. You guys do a lot of stuff, right? Even one organization I was in Westchester earlier this week and working with those guys, and I talked to one organization that ran, I'm not kidding you, I think 50 programs, which I'm sure some of you probably do here too. And so, and we generally try to, people will come up to me and say, okay, so my organization has 30 programs. We work everywhere from early childhood to older adults. How do we cram everything we do into, 3-sentence elevator speech? You don't. And stop trying. Stop trying to do that. Because you can't do that, and we tend to cram all this jargon and everything into our couple of sentences, and people have no idea what we're talking about. The other problem is, though, that the public, and especially policymakers too, I think, really see us as silos. So, oh, you work on after-school programs. Oh, you work with, kids in the juvenile justice system. You work with older adults. You work in higher ed, whatever it is, right? They don't see us as an interconnected system of services and programs that supports a thriving society. But think how valuable it would be if they did, right? Because oftentimes what happens is we'll get pitted against each other in budget, right? State or local budget discussions. Oh, we're already funding that domestic violence shelter. Do we have to fund another one? I've literally heard that. We want to be seen as an interconnected system. And that's why when we talk about the new frame for human services, it becomes so important that we talk about the value of the sector first before we start talking about our specific constituency or programs. Okay. So, how does this play out in our communications? So I'm going to show you one example of, so we solicited lots of examples from the field, and I'm going to use them throughout the presentation. This one is just an example from the field of a communication they did, I think, during the recession. It was designed to be fairly innocuous. Can everybody read that? Oh, I'll read it to you. Okay, so, oh no, that's right, I chose a different one because you guys work with children and youth. So this is just, again, a key message from one of our partner organizations. We are failing to do right by children and youth. Child poverty, youth homelessness, and juvenile delinquency threaten the health and well-being of the next generation. Isn't it time to invest more? I mean, seems pretty reasonable, doesn't it? Yes? No? Right, like you think like someone would read that and be like, sure, that sounds like a good idea. But what happens is, our brains translate it. And this is how Frameworks found the public translates a message even that simple. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Poor kids have to fight to overcome adversity, which makes them tougher and ultimately more successful. It helps if they have good, strong parents behind them, helping them make the right choices. Right? So you're hearing that individualism in there, about choices. You're starting to get a whiff of the willingness of the public to blame parents for things that go wrong with their kids. Talk more about in a minute. What else? Anything else jump out at you there? Yeah, like there's something good about adversity. Not that there isn't, because of course that is how we build resilience, right? By dealing with kind of life's normal challenges. But youth homelessness is maybe not something we want someone to have to deal with, because it may or may not build character.
I think that underneath all of this,
The one thing I want you to remember from this is that you are not your audience. Bill said this in the introduction, which means he remembered it from when I said it last night. So we have a tendency to design our communications in a vacuum. I mean, a lot of our organizations certainly can't afford to hire PR firms and communication firms to help us, who might be able to say like, oh, that sounds like jargon, or I don't really get that, or what are you trying to say here? So we have to be really careful about checking and double checking our language. And the new frame will help you do that, but this is part of the problem, because we're so immersed in the work, we tend to talk about it in a certain, almost shorthand sometimes. There's kind of two reasons that this happens. This translation happens, or this misperception happens. The one she was already getting at. The first one, though, is really just how our brains have evolved to process information. And so I mentioned that Frameworks has looked at the last few decades of brain research to understand how do we process information. And so I've drilled it all down into one cartoon, which will really irritate any scientist in the room. But this is how I understand the research. I mean, this is my experience at Thanksgiving every freaking year, right? There's just like that one family member I'm always working on every year, not related to me by blood. I always like to make that distinction. But this is the problem. We establish beliefs at a really young age without even realizing it. And those beliefs just get stronger and reinforced over time, whether what we hear is in support of them or in opposition. Doesn't matter. We dig in, right? And so, like, think about when you, so say you're a supporter of President Obama, as I was, and I was a very early supporter of him. When I moved to Chicago, he was running for state senator, and I got behind him then. I volunteered on his campaigns. And so then he became president, right? Because everybody, we all loved him during the run-up to the election. Then he became president, and he was who he is, which is a somewhat moderate, these days it probably looks like super progressive, but he was somewhat moderate Democrat. And he was starting to do things that were irritating people. Like Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, was criticizing him. And I would hear this criticism I'd read about, and I literally was sticking my head like, no, I can't hear you, I can't. I couldn't hear anything bad about him. And because I didn't want, right, like I had this belief, this firm belief, he's a good person, he's gonna be a great president, I wasn't gonna hear anything else. This is just human nature. We all do this. So Frameworks essentially has set up and helped us design communications to navigate around this. And I'll talk about how they do that in a minute. But one of the things they look at, so this is kind of like looking at how individuals process information. I should also mention what we have a tendency to do when we're like arguing with somebody, like me at Thanksgiving. I think if I just kind of throw enough data and facts at you, like you'll eventually just succumb, right? Like, oh yeah, you're right. Guess what? Just like you are not your audience, facts are not effective. They're not effective when they're unframed. That's right. That is helping the current administration. Because literally both sides are just lobbing facts at each other in numbers. You know, I saw a lot of data being thrown around this week about the Obamacare repeal. And I just kept thinking, this is not persuasive. This is not what's going to persuade people. We'll talk about what will. So the other thing that Frameworks looks at is kind of like, you know, at large, how cultures think about and tell stories about themselves. And this is what the one from Holland was getting at. There's something called cultural models. And cultural models are deeply and widely held beliefs across a culture. They motivate thought and behavior. And the more kind of baked in they are to the culture, so the more they're incorporated into our arts and our books and our music and our movies, the harder they are to, or the more, I should say, not the hard, the more of an impact they'll have when they get triggered. So the cultural model that can most get in our way of trying to connect with our audience and explain to them why we should care for and invest in human services and human needs is rugged individualism. And this idea that you can come here, you can come to this country with just the clothes on your back, and if you work hard enough, you can be Oprah. Right? You can be Oprah. Or what? That's the story we have told about this country for hundreds of years. I mean, this is why people have come here. And so cultural models aren't good or bad. Like, there's a lot of really wonderful things about that model, but when we're trying to build support for and creating compassion for people in need, people who are struggling, that can really get in our way, because then we automatically default to, well, just try harder. Just make better choices next time. Why did you get into so much debt? Why did you pick that school? Why did you buy that house? We just want to blame. We want to blame. And so what we need to do in our communications is inoculate against the rugged individualism model, but instead what we do is we invoke it over and over and over again. Because we've been told in our careers to do what? To put a face on the story. You know, if you're going to any audience, to a state legislature, if you're writing a fundraising appeal, you know, you've learned to tell individual stories. And guess what that does? It just triggers this idea of individualism. I'm going to talk about more about why that happens. But just wanted to give you a heads up that after today, you can never tell those stories again. So let's just walk through really quickly some of the what frameworks call kind of the swamp of human services. So the misperceptions by the public, the cultural models that the public has about human needs that can really trip us up. And this graphic and lots of the other ones I'm going to share in our toolkit online, so you can always download them. People often keep it next to their desks when they're writing an article or writing a website page or whatever, to remind themselves not to invoke these beliefs. So when we ask the public, what does it mean to do well? You know, what is well-being? What does it mean to thrive? Guess what the public said? There's one thing that they thought was really critical, the most critical thing to well-being. Very good, very good. Financial well-being. But of course, there's no agreement on what that looks like, right? Like how much money does it take? And then when pushed, there's a sense that like, well, it's probably a good idea if you're physically well too. Like physical well-being is, I know, isn't that crazy? It's crazy that this is what the public thinks. And this, when I say the public, I mean this is a nationally representative sample. This is across age, race, every demographic you can think of. So what's missing from that? Well, you guys know, emotional well-being, mental health. And it's hugely problematic in this country right now. I live in Chicago. The Cook County Jail, the sheriff there is a big advocate for mental health support. And he has done studies that show that I think upwards of like 95% of the people in the Cook County Jail, which is the largest jail in the country, are suffering from a mental illness. And they're in jail. So it's invisible. People don't even realize how important it is. What else is missing? Spiritual, absolutely. Right, social resources, friends, family, community, relationships, safety. I'm going to talk about that in a second. So we really want to, with this new narrative for human services, we really want to expand the definition of well-being for the public. Because then they will invest in the things that get you there, right? That get people there. Okay, and then when we ask the question, well, what gets in the way of somebody doing well? What threatens well-being? You've already heard what's the big thing that the public thinks causes problems. Oh, stupid people. If you just had more willpower. And the public is generally unwilling to blame children, generally. They will. But for the most part, they will just blame parenting, which again is another form of like, oh, that's not me. That's somebody else's problem. You know, they did something wrong. They need to fix it. That family needs to fix it, right? I mean, I'm sure that sounds probably familiar to you guys. And then when we ask, well, okay, so how do we improve well-being? Of course, what does the public think? Make better choices. I think it might be time for everybody to take a bite of their cookie. Get a little sugar in you. So individuals are responsible. But this is really, that second one is really important. There's a very strong model, cultural model in this country that the government is inept and corrupt. Doesn't matter where you live. You know, I live in Chicago, and that is in fact true. The second part is. And we often do a disservice. I don't know how much of this is true in Albany, just from what I've been hearing, and your mayor this morning seems like really amazing. But I've seen this in Illinois. So in Illinois, I think I mentioned we had been without a state budget for 2 years. So a lot, if not most of, the health and human service organizations I work with often have really big contracts with the state to do their job for them, right? To take care of the people of the state. And so they're not getting paid. Lutheran Social Services of Illinois laid off 700 people last year. A lot of them in the mental health field. So people are not getting paid. So you can imagine, and I'm going to show you an example of the press. And so how people in the sector, leaders in the human services sector are talking about the government right now, using a lot of blaming language, a lot of snark. I grew up on the East Coast. I am familiar with snark, and I'm really good at it. And when I moved to the Midwest, I had to kind of soften my edges a little bit, because people were like, yo, a little too sarcastic. But I gotta tell you now, the snark is real in Chicago, and it's flying all over the place. Lots of partisan bickering. But when we do that, people just think, politics as usual, retreat to their ideological corners, and they are just not willing to hear what you have to say. And then there's this sense in the public that, like, well, if somebody is suffering or in need in the community, there are these like informal networks, so like churches and other kind of informal groups that will kind of patch people when they fall. Well, what's the problem with that idea?
Not true, they're not being competent.
There you go. That's exactly right. Not true. A lot of communities they certainly don't have the resources to address all the problems, and they don't necessarily know what they're doing. Right? I mean, if it's just shelter for the night, fine, but to really try to address problems that people are trying to solve, informal networks can't do that. And then the other problem with that is that there are, in fact, formal networks, and that is you guys. So they're not even seeing it. I know it's hard to believe, it's like you're all invisible. I know it's not, she said it's not hard to believe. Sorry. That's not, hit me, I can take it. Okay, so, and then the final question is, well, okay, so we've established what well-being is and is not, and why some people need help at different points in their lives. Well, what are human services and how do they work? Well, you guys know. I think it's the food. I love her. She cracks me up every time. So human services is really a cognitive hole. People don't know what we do. They really think they have a very narrow understanding of human services, and they believe very strongly in the charity and compassion model, which we tend to evoke, especially like in our fundraising appeals. We talk about, and even, I even hear this, I'm hearing this in Illinois right now, the sector is talking about how people are still doing their jobs even though they're not getting paid. They're working nights, they're working overtime to make sure that people get the help they need, which is generally heroic, it really is, but we have to be really careful about how we frame that. Because then they'll just expect it of us. Right? And they do. I learned this at home. If I do the dishes every night, then I'm expected to do the dishes every night. Simple. Okay. So let me just talk, before I get into kind of what framing is and how we can kind of frame human services going forward, I just want to highlight a couple communications traps that we tend to fall into, that we all do in the sector, that we really want to have some discipline around and really just kick them to the curb. The first one is around like kind of the myth-fact approach, and we deal with this all the time in the sector where someone comes up and says, well, isn't it true that, and we're like, no, it's not true that, and you're going to restate the myth. That has unintended consequences. So I'll give you an example. You might remember several years ago when there was that really big flu epidemic. I think it was right around the recession. It was this horrible, like, double whammy. And people were not getting their flu shot because there was this really strong belief that the flu shot caused the flu. I watched X-Files for 10 years. Like, I was right there with them. I'm not getting that flu shot. I don't know what's in that. I don't know them tracking me. Law degree. Still picking up. So what the CDC did was they created this brochure, probably some of you guys even saw it, where they tried to dispel all these myths. First, they stated them. So the big one there, the flu shot can cause the flu. Fact. And what I said about facts? Fact. The flu shot cannot cause the flu. You know where this is going, right? So the University of Michigan did a study and exposed a group of people to this brochure. Didn't expose them to the flu. Exposed them to the brochure. And after 20 minutes or something, they asked everyone, what do you remember from this brochure? 70% or so said, I don't know, the flu shot causes the flu. Remember what I said about how hard it is to dislodge an existing belief? When we restate it, we've just reinforced it. 2 weeks later, they went back to the same group of people. What do you remember from that brochure? More people. Isn't that crazy? So even the people that got it right the first time, got it wrong the second time. But this is not even the worst consequence. What do you think is the worst thing? And it's not that they all got the flu, because they all probably did. CDC told me so. Think about that. Think about that. I was doing a workshop with a group of human service providers in San Francisco last year. And affordable housing and homelessness is a huge issue in San Francisco right now. And people that work in the nonprofit sector cannot afford to live like anywhere near San Francisco. And they were really excited when I got there because they had just had a few meetings with the editorial board of the San Francisco Gate, I think it was, to explain to them why it is that some people are homeless or struggle to find housing. And of course, it's very complex. It's not a homogeneous group. It's not because of bad choices. There's lots of different reasons. If you're talking about veterans, it can be one thing. If you're talking about young people, it could be another. And so the Gate was so persuaded by this meeting, it did a 3-part series, completely in the myth-fact format. People are not homeless because of bad choices. No. And I didn't want to break it to them, but I was just like, you just reinforced every single thing that people believe about the homeless in San Francisco. And there are ways that we do this without stating myth-fact, and I'm going to show you an example in a minute. So that's one problem. The other communication trap, my personal favorite, she just got it. So, this is how we tend to lead all of our communications. What am I getting at here? Sky is falling. The sky is falling. The world is ending. People are dying in the streets. And that's true. And that's the message that you hear in Chicago, and nobody cares. Right? Because urgency disengages. And you can imagine why that might be. So say there's an article about your program in the paper that day, and you're talking about children, about ACEs and about some of the children you work with and some of the really kind of horrible stories that you hear and the hard work it takes to help people be successful in life, right? And so somebody starts reading this article, and and they'll often start with an individual story, and they'll read about this, this young person's life and how horrible it is. And you're like, you know what? I got to catch the train. I got to get to my daycare. I got to go to work. I can't see my boss. I got this appointment later. I'm really kind of worried about. And then I got to check in on my dad. These early stage Alzheimer's. Like whatever, right? Life. So if we start throwing problems that feel too big to solve at people, they're just going to turn away. And that's what they're doing. Climate change. Most communications around climate change feel so fatalistic and too big to solve that people are like, I'm just going to deal with my day-to-day right now. That's because that's what I can control. So this cultural model is called fatalism. So we want to be really careful in the kind of prime real estate of our communications, the first couple sentences, not to cue this up. It's hard because you guys are really immersed in the work, in the problems, in the day-to-day. You know how bad it is, right? And you just think, well, if the public just understood how bad it was, then they would care. And they would do something, or they would vote for this piece of legislation, or vote this person out of office, or give us the money that we need, right? You think if you could just convey that in an emotional, persuasive way, that's going to motivate, but it doesn't. You are not your audience, unframed facts are not effective, and urgency disengages. Rules to live by in our communications. So instead, what you want to do, and I know this is hard sometimes, it kind of makes me think of Allison's the argument she was having with her daughter, how her daughter just kept this really reasonable tone. Mom, you're not hearing me. Mom, we're not talking. That's who you want to be, the 16-year-old composed daughter, basically. Who would have thought I'd ever say that? You want to have this kind of tone that, okay, there is a problem. We know what it is, and we know how to solve it. Here's what we need to do that. Because a reasonable tone will jolt people out of their ideological corners and into what's called the persuadable middle. And that's where you want to meet people. You want to meet people in the middle. So that's when they can hear what you had to say, they can learn, they can understand, and they can act. Okay, so the third and final communication trap I'm going to talk about are individual stories of success and struggle that we all tell in our communications because we've been told put a face on it, right? And so, we'll think, wow, they know this, this young person had this great success in our program, and now they're in college and they're doing really well, or they're married, they've got a job and kids. Then they'll see what kind of outcomes are available to everybody else, right? And often we tell the story that a teenager not doing well in Chicago, you kind of not showing up at school, getting bad grades, starting to get in trouble on the streets a little bit, got into an innovative after-school program. And 2 years later, yada, 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 he goes to Harvard. Right? What do you think the story is that organization tells every year in their fundraising appeal? What's wrong with that story? It's an exceptional story. So the response will often be from the public, then why can't they all go to Harvard? Which is, right? And it is exceptional, and it's not what we want for everyone. Because there is a whole continuum of what reaching your full potential looks like. And it's not Harvard for everybody, and it shouldn't be. So be really careful about that. We have to be equally careful about the struggle stories we tell. Single mom, holding down 2 jobs, taking care of her kids, and barely has enough to pay the rent every month. Because what's the public going to do with that story? Why did she have 2 kids? Why did she move to a cheaper neighborhood? Right, I hate that one around housing. Move somewhere else. If you're cold because you're living on the streets in Chicago, move to Florida. Like that's for so many reasons that's not an option and not a solution, right? But that's where people go. That's where people go. Thanksgiving every year at Ilsa's house. So there is a way. Of course, so people always, this is the big thing that especially fundraisers will come up to me after workshops and like, oh my God, Ilsa, I can't send out a fundraising appeal without individual stories. And so in the next level workshop, we work on how do you keep people in the story? Because you absolutely have to keep people in the story. What you want to do is use them, you could even use that Harvard story, but tell the broader kind of system story. What were the systemic challenges that young man faced? Why was he struggling in school in the first place? Could it be that he had to get up really early in the morning, help take care of his younger siblings, get them off to school, had to take 2 different buses to get to his high school through several different gang neighborhoods, and had lots of different systemic challenges and was also holding down a job, right? The other thing, so we can use that as an example of here is what the young people in this community face. And then here's an example. The other thing though that's important about that Harvard story, the yada yada yada, was what was invisible in that story. Right, all of you. The program, you know, the woman that ran the program, the organization itself, all the other people in this kid's life. He had a wonderful mother. He had teachers in his school that of course cared about him. He had a church he was really involved with. We want to tell stories of collective impact. So we don't want to tell stories about extraordinary people. We want to tell stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Does that make sense? So President Obama was at the University of Chicago, where I used to work, last week, and he said that exact thing. I was like, oh, did you see one of my workshops? And then I realized, I was like, I probably read, like, yeah, he said that like 5 years ago, and I probably like internalized it, and now I think I came up with it. So, talk to my husband, I do that all the time. So what we really want to do with our stories is move away. You know, I think oftentimes the public is focused on the effect, especially if you're working with young people who are getting into trouble. They're focused on the behavior. You know, he stole something, he's getting into fights, whatever it is. But we really want to take them a couple steps back. How did this kid get here? What systems could be in place to keep other kids from getting here? Right? Okay. Any questions about the communications traps or what we talked about so far?
What is it that you said to take a positive and now you really
that we want to tell stories of ordinary people coming together to do extraordinary things, which is really what you do every day. Because again, that kind of thing is, again, going to help elevate the sector as well.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
This may be hair splitting.
Sure.
But I think I often get stuck on the extraordinary fact. I feel like I spend most of my life encouraging the people that I'm tasked to work with to do ordinary stuff successfully. And the idea of the extraordinary is always like, you know, it's that whole thing, if you grow up in the hood, then
Sure.
you got to shoot the NBA. You know, you're not starting that, then you're out, but other than that, you're doomed.
Yeah, I hear you. And really, and a lot of the frame that we're going to get into in a minute, you know, I will have people say to me, well, this language doesn't work for me for this reason, or this concept doesn't quite work for that reason. And I always say there's always room for kind of adaptation. So if that language doesn't work for you, don't use it. Absolutely not. Just a few tips when we're thinking about the stories that we tell, kind of questions we can ask. I don't usually like to use kind of text-heavy slides, but I figured I will share this with Bill afterwards, and he can share it with all of you so you have it. Always just think about, what is this story going to do for me, for my organization? Who is the star of the story? These can kind of help guide you as you're developing stories. You want to focus on the context, you know, point to larger themes. And you really want that kind of fourth bullet point that's the most important. We don't want to make it seem like we're fixing a person. We're fixing a problem. So we want to be really clear with our language around that. Does that make sense? It's hard, because I'm sure a lot of times we feel like that is what we're doing. But that's not the message we want to give to the public, because then they will blame the individual. It just makes it too easy on them. Okay, so we're going to read this. This is a communication from the field. And I want to hear from you, what do you think are some, based on what we talked about, what are some of the problems with this communication? Can everybody read it, or do I need to read it out loud? Okay. Okay. Growing up in poverty increases the chances that an American will continue to live in poverty as an adult. That's of course bad for those people directly affected and also bad for the economy. Furthermore, it casts a long shadow on the American dream. A common response to intergenerational poverty is to scale back forms of direct aid to families. Welfare, food stamps, etc., that are frequently labeled as creating dependency. This position flies in opposition to the facts. Research shows that giving aid to a family increases the chances that a child will not continue to live in poverty as an adult. If we want to end intergenerational poverty in America, we should be giving families more aid, not less. To state the obvious, money is a big deal. Having more money makes all sorts of things possible. A healthier diet, higher quality childcare, a move to a safer environment, trip to a museum, or other experiences that expand a child's world. Kids with access to any of these things are more likely to thrive. What's the problem? And there are so many. Where to start? Yes, very good. Yeah, so we have the myth fact in here that in the middle paragraph, we talk about, these programs are frequently labeled as creating dependency. That's the myth. And then we get into the fact, and so we've just restated that. We've just reinforced that myth in people's minds, which is a deeply held myth in this country. What we could have done in this paragraph was just, that entire first two sentences go. You start with, research shows, and I wouldn't say giving aid, because aid tends to trigger that narrow understanding. So I would say that, research shows that supporting a family or giving support to a family increases the chances, and again, I would not say this in the negative. Clear says a child will not continue to live in poverty as an adult. So it increases the chances that a child will succeed as an adult, or be even more specific. I'm always telling the people, the organizations I work with, be specific about what you need. That they'll graduate from high school, that they're more likely to have a family, that they're more likely to have a career, what to be involved in their community. All kinds of things are possible when we support them when they're young, right? So be specific. What else? Very fatalistic. You would be surprised if I told you, and I'm not going to, who we got this from. It might surprise you. But yeah, right in the beginning, it's like, oh, well, if you're born into poverty, you're most likely going to be poor, so like, forget it. Like, sorry. You know what I mean? It just feels too big to solve. Start with, what's the world we want people to be living in? What do we want the world to look like? Anything else that jumps out at you?
The solutions are at the end and not the beginning.
Solutions are at the end. And what's the solution? Money. 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 Aid. But we know that just reinforces this very narrow understanding of what it means to do well. Good. So now you can go back and review all your communications and start crossing. I had someone come up to me after a recent workshop and say, like, oh my God, Ilsa, we just finished a 2-year rebranding program. And everything was outside of everything. I was like, oh. So I always feel like I'm in the workshops, I'm like part therapist, part coach. But I'm definitely the bringer of bad news. So, but there is a solution. There is a solution, framing. So what is framing? So, we all tell stories. We tell stories to make sense of the world, right? And our place in it, and why bad things happen to people. We're telling stories all the time. Framing is just a series of decisions we make about what to leave in a story, what to leave out, what to emphasize, what order to put things in, and what the tone should be. So we're still telling stories, we're just being more disciplined about it. And stories are also, framing is also about messengers. So let me talk about that for a second. So something that's come up a lot in the presentations I've been giving since last summer is people, especially because we were so immersed in that presidential campaign for like, a year and a half or however long it lasted. And last summer, when a lot of the campaign ads were really negative, on both sides, And it did seem like fear was motivating people. So I had people asking me in my workshops, well, it seems to be working, like scaring people is working, so shouldn't we scare people? And I was like, okay, let me explain the difference between elections and political communications versus what it is we're trying to do. We're essentially trying to build a movement. We're trying to build a movement so people understand how important it is to make sure that everybody does well. It seems really simple, but if you've been paying attention to the news for the last 3 months, you understand why it's so important, right? And so in elections, zero-sum, winner takes all. You either, on election day, you were either Hillary or you were Donald. Very clear, unless you're Al Gore and George Bush, and then it took a little while. And then, but social movements, issue evolution is very inclusive and positive sum. There are not supposed to be losers. We're trying to bring everybody on board. In elections communications, we're trying to get just enough votes to win. Sometimes we don't even get the majority of votes and we still win. And in issue evolution, it's really a buildup of a consistent steady stream of messages. So I always want to reinforce, this is a long-term communication strategy. Social movements are built over decades. The stories and the cultural models that we're trying to inoculate were built up over decades. This is a long-term process. So the more people that start using the frame, the quicker it's going to be, we're going to see uptake of it. Election campaigns tend to be very scorched earth. I will kill anybody in my way if it gets me elected, right? Whereas we're looking for long-term incremental change. And as a result, what happens in social movements is by the end, people feel really engaged and like they were part of the process. There is room for debate and dissent, and there's time to have that in a social movement. There's not really room for that in elections communication. So let me give you an example of how framing can really impact a social movement. So the gay marriage movement, which is decades old, was for the first 15, 20 years or so, the primary message was all around gay couples should be able to marry, they be able to enjoy the same rights that heterosexual couples do, whether that's a tax break or access to health care or estate benefits, legal benefits, all those kinds of things, right? Don't deny us the same rights that everybody else has. The problem is that sets up that really invokes kind of the makers versus takers argument. Like if people feel like, oh, these are scarce resources, I don't want to give something up. And so there was not a lot of support for gay marriage for that reason. That was one of a couple of reasons. They changed their key message several years ago. Does anybody know what they changed it to? And it really created a lot of momentum. This was the hashtag after the Supreme Court ruled in favor of gay marriage. This was everywhere. Do you feel the difference from the previous slide to this slide? So the message was, gay couples just want to be able to express their love the same way that heterosexual couples do. And they focus on values. The value of family, the value of commitment. And this, coupled with other things that were happening in the world, really helped to drive the movement. It made a big shift. So framing can really make a big difference, and almost can feel like it happens overnight sometimes. Okay. So, just really quickly, I mentioned that this work is research-based, and that we tested, we used a nationally representative sample of people across the country. So age, race, political ideology, gender, religion, geography. So when I tell you that the public, we're going to go over 4 frame elements and the whole frame together, and I'll say, this was productive for the public, I mean everybody. Because people will always say to me, did you test it with elected officials? Guess what? They are people too. I know, it's hard. But they are. So they are included. And what we wanted to know was, we tested 3 different frames. I'm going to tell you what those are in a minute. We tested 3 different new narratives against a control. And what we wanted to see was, did it change people's attitudes about people who need help? Because we know that's a huge problem. You saw that in the video, right? We wanted to know, did it expand people's knowledge of what human services is, what we do, why it matters? And did it generate change? Did people vote differently or support different policies because they were told about the work we do in this new frame? So these are big outcomes. These are big outcomes. Okay, so the new frame is essentially what you want to do. I think how I want to start this. Let's start this way. What you want to do in your communications going forward is answer 4 questions. The first question that's up here has to come first. The other ones can kind of be interspersed. But the first question anybody ever wants to know when they're reading something or listening to you talk about something is, why should I care? Right? Why does this matter to me? That is the question we want to answer first. And it's most productive if you can lead with a value. Because values are deeply and widely held. They're not really, they don't really shift and change over short periods of time. And people make really big decisions based on their values. And there's one political party in this country that does a really good job of tapping into values. So the value that was the most productive for changing public's attitudes about the people that we work with and the work that we do was the value of human potential. This idea that everybody should be able to reach their full potential, and if they do, they're then able to contribute to their communities. That's it. You basically want to lead all of your communications going forward with some version of that. And we're going to practice this in a minute. And then you kind of get into, okay, well, how do we do that? How do we make sure everybody reaches their full potential? How does human services work? And if it's not working, why? And here's where we start to use metaphors. Go back for a second. So metaphors, we use metaphors all the time, particularly to explain kind of complex subjects, but also, you know, somebody might walk into your office one day, oh, how are you feeling today? Oh, I feel like I'm pushing a boulder up a hill, and it keeps rolling back on top of me. It's a metaphor. We use them all the time. But what's so powerful about metaphors is, first of all, it's going to make it really easy for you to explain the complex work you do without a lot of jargon. And jargon is not our friend. The other thing is that we use metaphors ourselves to share and spread ideas. So when you start talking about your work using the metaphor I'll talk about in a minute, it makes it really easy for your audience to then become your ambassadors. And then we want to talk about solutions. Well, what can we do about it? What are you suggesting we do about it? And you'll start to fill in the narrative structure with some examples. So I'm going to walk you through each of these in the time that we have left. The first one is the value. So I'm not going to go through this for each of the 3 elements, but I do want you to know that we did a lot of, Frameworks did a lot of rigorous research to make sure that we were using the right elements. So we actually tested 6 different values in the field to see which one was going to be the most productive. And what we wanted to know was, did it expand people's awareness of the work that we do? So beyond direct services. So would they understand that if you talked about the work using this value, would they understand that you do prevention and research and advocacy? And would it also, remember I said very in the beginning that one of the goals of the frame is to elevate the sector, so the public sees the work you do as equally valid and important as the private sector and the public sector. So that's that last in the red there, the importance and efficacy of the sector. We also tested the value against that. So here's where some of the bad news comes in for people. So we tested some of the values that are already in the field, like the value of self-sufficiency, Lots of times we promote that as a goal, like we're working to help people become more self-sufficient, but it actually depressed support for the sector. So did this idea of opportunity for all, which has kind of been in the zeitgeist for the last several years, which we actually thought was going to be the big winner, because there just seemed to be a lot of chatter around this idea that everybody should have the same opportunities. But again, it really depressed support for the sector. We're not totally sure why, but when we saw that, we knew we had to stay away from it. So the value of human potential is the only one that was really kind of statistically significant in terms of improving support for the work that we do. But even still, it only improves support for the sector a little bit. And I point that out to say that it's really important that you not walk away from here thinking if you just start talking about human potential that that's all that you need to do. We have to use all the frame elements together. That's when we see it kind of go off the charts. Like Frameworks has never seen in their 15 years of research a new frame move people so quickly in their understanding of an issue. So it's important that we use all the frame elements together.
Could you say that again?
So, which part? Oh, sure. So, Frameworks has been working on a wide range of issues for the last 15 or 20 so years. I think I mentioned early childhood, climate, that kind of thing. And they have never seen, they did something called persistence trials at the end of the research. And what they did was, they would bring somebody, somebody into a room who was squarely in the old frame, who was blaming individuals for their problems, who had kind of a very narrow view of what the sector did, food, clothing, shelter. And they would talk to them about human services using the new frame, using the value and the metaphor and the examples that we tested. And then they'd let them sit there for like 30 minutes. And then they would bring somebody new into the room. And that person was in the old frame. And the person who'd just been, talked to you about all this stuff in the new frame had to explain human services to that. It's like a game of telephone. They wanted to see that the frame held up, the integrity of the frame held up over time, and it did. And I've seen some of these videos where they'll stop somebody on the street and they'll ask them a few questions. It's clear that they're right there in the old frame of blaming individuals and all that kind of thing, and they'll just talk to them about human services in this new way. Well, don't we want to make sure everyone can reach their full potential? And here are the kind of things they need to do that, and then it was like a light would go on. Oh, well, yeah, of course. Oh, of course I would support policies that did that. Oh, yes, of course we need to be doing that. I mean, it's almost like mind control. You know what I mean? Like, it's amazing. So Frameworks just had never seen that quick of a shift, which is part of the reason that Kresge and Casey are investing money into getting me out and traveling and doing workshops. And we feel like the more people that can get trained to use the new frame, the quicker we can start to see results. Does that answer your question? Yep. Okay, cool. So human potential. What do we mean by this? So, it can be as simple as this statement on the left. When we support well-being, we make sure everybody can reach their potential and fully contribute to our communities. What's so amazing about the value of human potential is that people intuitively get, without having it had to be explained to them, that you cannot reach your full potential on your own. That lots of people come in and out of your life at different points in your life and are critical to you doing well and to reaching your full potential. And you don't just reach your full potential and then you're like, you're done, right? Like, what age would that be even, that you've reached your full potential? That it's just kind of an ongoing evolution. So then you see what's happening. So then it starts to make sense to people why you might need different kinds of supports or help throughout your life to reach your full potential. And that it takes a lot of different kinds of people to be involved, whether it's a teacher, a coach, a therapist, to help you do that. And they get that potential is much more than just what your salary is or how much money you have. Again, it's kind of an automatic, fuller understanding that when you reach your full potential, that means you have friends, you have good relationships, family, you're physically doing well, or you're getting treatment so that you do physically well. Emotional well-being. Again, none of these things now have to be explained. They're automatically understood. So it's like very powerful. Does that make sense? And they understand, I mentioned the Harvard example earlier, people automatically get as well that human potential looks different for everybody. So while one person's potential might be indeed to go to Harvard and become president of the United States, somebody else's might be like, I just want to get my freaking GED, get a job at Home Depot and hang out with my friends. Why can't I do that? So it can look differently for everybody, and there's no judging. No judging. Okay, so let me show you an example of kind of an unframed or like a poorly framed communication, and then I'll show you the reframe so you can start to feel the difference. So these are my people in Chicago, very frustrated with the governor. And this was a press release, part of a press release that they sent out last year after the governor did his State of the State speech. So as lawmakers wrestle with the budget, funding for vital services are at risk of being gutted. The cuts proposed would shut the door to critical services for hundreds of thousands of individuals and families across the state. But then what? Families in need aren't going away. For each proposed cut, some basic questions need to be answered. What is the impact on the family denied access to services? How much will that impact end up costing the state? How many people losing elder or disability care would require institutionalization, which is far more expensive? How much more will taxpayers end up having to support in costs associated with increased ER visits? We need a budget that's prudent, reasonable, and doesn't end up costing more than it saves. Cutting in the dark is never a good idea. What do you think about that? Very negative. Very negative. You don't necessarily get a sense of like, okay, what do we need to do here? Right? What else? What else jumps out at you? No real solution. You don't really know what do you want from me? I mean, you kind of get at the end this reasonable and prudent budget, but that's really kind of a insult. I mean, most of it is an insult to lawmakers, which I told you earlier. You don't want to cue up that the government is inept and corrupt model, because people will they will go there with you. And then all of a sudden they don't see government as a solution. And for most of you, the government is your partner, right? You have to work with them, so you can't be insulting them one day and then working with them the next day. I mean, you can, you do, but it doesn't help you. It doesn't help your case with the public. Something else in here that we had to kind of drop as a communications device are rhetorical questions. Because since we know that human services is a cognitive whole and people don't know what it is, when you set up those rhetorical questions, people will answer them. Your brain will automatically work to answer it, and usually just in your whatever your existing belief system is, which we know from our research does not help us. So just don't use that as a device anymore. Okay, so let me show you the reframe with the human potential value. As our policymakers use our most important civic tool for peering into the future, our public budget, we must make it a priority to attend to our nation's most important asset, our human potential. When we support well-being, we ensure that everyone can contribute to our communities. To do that, we must maintain and protect the initiatives that foster people's potential. For example, nurse visits for people with disabilities keeps them home and out of institutions, which keeps our communities vibrant. Health and nutrition efforts targeted at families today make sure that children's talents and gifts will be available to our workforce tomorrow. A good budget meets our needs today and plans for the future. So let's keep it in mind that we need everyone's potential for the civic, social, and economic well-being of our communities. What do you think? People will often tell me that after they read in smaller workshops where they're reading that one first and then they read that one, that they literally felt like after they read this one they felt kind of depressed and unmotivated, and some people are angry. Imagine living in a state. I mean, being confronted with this on a daily basis. And then after they read that, they felt kind of hopeful. Oh, it feels like there's something we can do here. Mm-hmm. Does that resonate? So, I was doing a workshop in Los Angeles in the fall, and there was a guy there from New York City in the workshop. And he hadn't said anything the entire workshop. And after he read that, he raised his hand. He's like, Ilsa, this is all just puppies and rainbows. In a really thick New York accent, which I wish I could replicate. And I said, yes, it is. It is. Because what I tell you earlier, urgency disengages, fatalism disengages, crisis language disengages. People want, people want to know, what kind of world do we want to live in? What does it look like? What can I do? And they used examples in here really well. Again, a budget touches on everything, right? And you're not going to be able to, they tried with all these questions, you're not going to be able to touch on every single issue that a budget addresses. But with 2 examples about nurse visits for people with disabilities, and then, what's the other one? Oh, nutrition efforts for children. 2 kind of vivid, non-jargony examples about why the budget matters. Can really motivate engagement. So we have to work, that's something that we really have to work on in our own communications, is our use of examples and and dropping the jargon and helping people see, there's this organization in New York City that I've done some work with, Harvey Milk High School, and they work with LGBTQ youth. And they talk about, in their mission statement and in all their communications, they talk about the vulnerable youth that they work with. LGBTQ, at-risk, vulnerable youth. And I'm always like, you gotta drop the word vulnerable. It's so ubiquitous these days. We talk about the vulnerable veterans, the vulnerable elderly, the vulnerable people with disabilities. It's so ubiquitous, it's become meaningless. But also, what else? What else might be wrong with using the word vulnerable to describe people? It's definitely victim language. Also, nobody self-identifies as vulnerable. Nobody. So you want everyone to see themselves in your communications. So I asked it, and so I got some pushback from this group. Well, but Ilsa, they are vulnerable. Okay, why? Tell me why. I mean, I kind of knew the answer, but I wanted them to articulate it. I'm like, well, LGBTQ youth have higher rates of depression, higher rates of suicidal ideation, more likely to be victims of violence. Say that then. It takes up more space, but it makes it real for people. So here's what I want you to do. So we've got like 40 minutes left. So what I'd like you to do, you all got those little notebooks, those cute little notebooks from LaSalle Academy School when you came in. I want you to spend a few minutes thinking about how you talk about the work you do. So imagine you're at like a networking event with a bunch of people that don't work in your sector, that don't really know what you do. And normally you'd walk up to people, you introduce yourself, and you just say your title. I'm Director of Volunteer Outreach, or I'm Director for Programs at the YMCA. And people don't know what that means. So I want you to instead come up with a description of either your organization or your particular job using the human potential value. So here's an example. My name's Nancy, and my work makes sure that the gifts and talents of older Americans remain available to our communities after they retire. I run a program that taps their skills for volunteer-run organizations. You see the difference? So see if you just work on this for a couple minutes, and then I would just like a couple people to share, either somebody who really struggled with it, or somebody who's feeling really good about theirs and they want me to take them down a notch. So let's just do not even 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Okay? So the first question you want to answer is what? What do you do? Why does it matter? Why does it matter? Right. So 3 people learned something. Good. Okay. Why does this matter? I know it's Friday. I know. Okay, why does this matter? And then, how does it work? How does human services work? Because guess what? Nobody knows how it works. And so what we want to do here is use metaphors. People use metaphors to share ideas. They can become your ambassadors. You can explain really complex systems using a metaphor. It'll take up a lot less space. So we use metaphors all the time. This is one of our big ones, right? The safety net metaphor. The problem with, and this is one of those things that you're never going to use again, ever. This tested so poorly. The problem with the safety net metaphor is kind of twofold. One is it's been around a long time. I think since like the New Deal, like that era. I don't know what the hell that was, but I always say it because it sounds smart. And it's really become aligned with a political party. So the Democrats support kind of safety net programs, right? But the Republicans support self-sufficiency. So we just want to drop it. There's another reason why you want to drop it, almost more important, which is why does somebody need a net? They did something dangerous, they did something stupid, they jumped, they fell, and now I have to catch them? I don't want to catch them. I got my own problems. So the safety net as a metaphor doesn't work. This is the other metaphor that we tested that was really problematic. And unfortunately, I suspect a lot of you use it. It's called the journey metaphor, and it plays out in our communications when we talk about getting somebody on the pathway to success, helping someone climb the ladder out of poverty. We use the word empower. How many people here use the word empower? Talk about, yeah. The problem with that is it triggers the American cultural model of individualism. You know, I empowered this person to make better choices. It's not productive for us. The metaphor that was productive was this idea that human services build well-being just like you build a house. I started, okay, tell me more. So what's so wonderful about this metaphor, kind of like the human potential value, is it does a lot of things for you, that it does a lot of the work for you, just by using it. So people understand that you cannot build a house, like one person generally, one person cannot build a house, right? It takes lots of different resources and expertise and lots of different people, just like it takes lots of different experts and parents and teachers to build well-being. Also, you don't just build a house and then you're done, right? Often, even when you build a new house, you still need immediate repairs, oftentimes, or you're going to need repairs a few years later. You need kind of major maintenance. Decades later, just like our well-being needs the same kind of care and attention. Is this making sense, how this might work? So you can analogize. So there's so many ways you can be creative with this, and in longer workshops we actually work on it together in groups. Like you can talk about how, analogize the roles in your organization to the roles of like engineer, helping to build a house, or an architect is, like a mentor helping to design a child's future. Somebody came up with that one recently. And then you can also talk about the materials of well-being, shaking foundations. I'll get into that in a second. So there's like lots of places you can go with it. Just want to give you a quick example. Just using the Medicaid example since this is such a big issue right now. I think what I'm going to do. Oh, I'll read this. We'll go ahead and read it. Okay. So this is poorly framed using fatalism. So there is a movement to convert Medicaid into a block grant, likely eliminating the guarantee that everyone who's eligible would receive it, giving states sweeping new authority to restrict eligibility. A Medicaid block grant would institute deep cuts to federal funding for state Medicaid programs, threaten benefits for tens of millions of low-income families, senior citizens, and people with disabilities. To compensate for these severe funding cuts, states would likely have no choice but to institute draconian cuts to eligibility, benefits, and provider payments. To illustrate the likely magnitude of these cuts, an analysis from the Urban Institute found that between 14 and 21 million people would eventually lose their coverage. So what's the problem with this description of Medicaid? What? Say again? Too big? Oh, it feels way too big to solve. It's what? Snobby? I love that word. But yes, I hear you. It is, yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't even know what that is. Another big problem is in the beginning of the second sentence, and this is, I think, for me, has been the big problem with all the coverage around Obamacare repeal and Medicaid, is that we only talk about in terms of the children, or senior citizens, or people with disabilities. But in fact, healthcare and Medicaid benefits all of us. Right? So here's an opportunity to show how an entire community benefits when you address an issue like health and wellness. So the reframe, where we use the value and we use the metaphor. So you can start to see how it plays out in communications. When we support well-being, we make sure that everyone can reach their potential and fully contribute to our communities. When the building materials for well-being are not available, people and communities may have difficulty weathering life's storms. Healthcare that supports physical and mental health is a keystone for well-being and resilience. Medicaid provides that care for 20% of our population. Getting health concerns addressed can mean being able to stay in your home, at a job, or engage in your community. Medicaid creates the stability we all need to do well in life. So you're normalizing it. This is really important to do in our communication. Converting Medicaid into a block grant would make it harder to ensure that everyone who's eligible receives it, blah, blah, blah. Up to 21 million people could lose access to health care, including preventative doctor visits, cancer screenings, and prescription medicine. As we seek to keep our communities vibrant, let's make sure our policymakers know that the current Medicaid system works. What do you think? More positive? Yeah, you see what the benefits are to the community. More inclusive. Keep what works. It's very clear what we want to do. It absolutely answers the question why anyone should care. It gives a couple like really vivid examples of what Medicaid does and what it prevents. It does a lot of work in a pretty short period of time using the metaphor. Is it starting to feel like this is something you can do in your communications? So you're not feeling like totally overwhelmed, like I'm just gonna go back to writing things the way I always wrote them once Ilsa's back in Chicago? Okay, so, and we have, just so you know, in our toolkit online, we have lots of different examples of how to use the metaphor and use the human potential value. We have lots of different tips. We have things you can download. There's tons of free resources to learn more about this. So the second question, which, and again, we use the construction metaphor, but when we start talking about like why aren't some people doing well, what are some of the problems that people face, we want to, again, inoculate against the public's willingness to blame individuals and to help them see the larger systems, the environment, the context that's at play. And we extend the metaphor and we talk about things like shaky foundations. So, for example, if you're talking about early childhood, you might talk about building early childhood builds a strong foundation and increases its resilience as children get older, something like that. But you can talk about missing materials, or even, when we build a house with cheaper materials, it's more likely to need maintenance sooner. Kind of business case argument, we need to be a little bit careful about that. I'll explain why in a minute. And then this idea of life storms. Now, I'm working with an organization in Illinois that does a lot of the work that you do. They do foster care programs, they have a residential home, they work with, ACEs, something like that. And this was their current mission statement. Our organization is focused on helping the diverse children and families in our community who have significant psychological, emotional, and behavioral problems resulting from abuse or neglect, trauma, and mental illness. Like, whoa. Even after that first sentence, you're like, oh. To achieve our mission, we apply a family-centered approach and offer bilingual services. In 2016, our organization provided a variety of therapy services to over 1,400 children and adults. That last sentence I hear a lot. Like organizations always want to say how many people they served. I always caution against that. I will let an organization leave it if they really want to, as long as it's incorporated into the frame. But those numbers will often, people see numbers and it makes it really easy to default to old belief systems. So they'll see 1,450 and think like, oh my God, there's that many messed up kids in our community? That's a lot of bad parents. Right? So we just want to help them not do that. So here is the reframe. And it is longer, but I do feel like with the issues that you guys are facing, like when we were talking about the sexual abuse organization up there, moving on. Sometimes it might require a bit more explanation. You might have to take up a little bit more real estate. Our organization builds the well-being of children and families in a caring community of skilled and dedicated professionals. Our community's future, our social and economic vitality, depends upon all children having the opportunity to grow up into healthy adults cognitively, socially, and emotionally. That means making sure children have the resources and supports they need to build strong brains and bodies. But when children are exposed to chronic toxic stressors such as abuse or neglect, the effects can be like constructing a building on a shaky foundation. These experiences can have negative, long-lasting health consequences. Preventing abuse and intervening early and effectively when abuse does occur are two important ways you can help children maintain or regain the stable foundation they need. Yes. Why are puppies and rainbows important? Because we know that crisis language, fatalism, too big to solve, all that kind of thing just disengages people. And when you show the public, here's what we want the world to look like, here's what's possible, here's why it matters, that engages them. They want to hear more. Tell me more. Yeah. And you know, it's not like puppies and rainbows and unicorns, because unicorns aren't real. So you still want to be, you want to still be able to talk about what the problem is, but with solutions. If that makes sense. Yeah. yeah, good, I'm glad. I always learn something like that when I do these presentations. So, do you see the difference? Does it feel legitimately different to you? And so, like I said, I'm happy to share this PowerPoint with you, and we really do encourage organizations to literally plagiarize from our examples. And I always get pushed back on that point, like, oh, we don't want all of you to start using the same language. We're already all using the same language. It's just wrong. So now you have the right language. Okay? Yes. That's exactly right. It'll happen more quickly. That's exactly right. So the third element of the frame is solutions. And it's in here last. It's not that you necessarily have to. I would always close on, what action do you want people to take? What's your solution? But you can start talking about the solutions earlier in the communication. And what we do here is we use examples. I've been talking about the use of kind of explanatory examples, vivid examples to really bring life to the problem that we're talking about or the solution that we're recommending. They can really motivate people to get engaged. Oh yeah, we want to make sure that people with disabilities or older people can get access to nurse visits at home because that keeps them in the home. We know that's better because, using those kinds of examples. So we tested a couple different kinds of examples, again, to see what was most productive for us. And we did test the economic example, because I know we're often using that in the field. If we invest this much money now in children suffering from abuse or trauma, it's going to save us this much money down the road, either because they won't end up in prison or whatever it is, right? Guess what? It didn't work. It didn't work. The examples, the kind of examples that work are called life cycle examples. These were really successful and they help the public see the value of the work you do across the lifespan, even if your organization only focuses on, for example, 13 to 18-year-olds. So you want to make the connection to the work that you do to, everybody. Hugely important. So we're trying to move people away from thinking that human services only benefits the direct recipient. So with life cycle examples, super important. Again, I wanted you to have this in the PowerPoint. I won't go through it completely, but be very specific. We talked about this already. Drop the jargon, and make sure you include the things, even if you do just direct service, which you probably don't, but even if you did, you still want to talk about the value of prevention, research, advocacy, the other things that we do that we often forget to mention in our communications because we're trying to often bring in money for specific programs. But you want to show the whole range because that's going to build more support for all of that work. I'm going to show you, there's like so many places you can go with life cycle examples. I'm just going to show you one really quickly. Here we're talking about violence. And there's kind of three options, and I just want to read through each one and figure out which one is we use kind of life cycle most strategically. The first one, violence threatens Americans in every stage of life. Infant neglect, childhood sexual trauma, and elder abuse are all occurring at epidemic proportions in our society. Yeah, we already know that's wrong. Okay. It's so negative, right? B, when we establish a strong foundation for well-being through early learning programs, build on it through advocacy for youth development, and shore it up through opportunities to stay engaged throughout adulthood and later life, we make sure our communities are safe and vibrant. This is the big winner, obviously. And the reason that, so you see how they talk about, these are violence prevention programs, but they don't actually say violence prevention. They're just explaining what they are and why they matter. The third one is closer. Children who participate in early learning have benefits throughout their lifespan, from academic gains in elementary school to decreased absences from school as adolescents to reduced involvement in crime as adults. The problem with this is that I think we can do better than reduced involvement in crime as adults. Right? So you always want to try to flip it. And I think in this sector we often go to the negative because we see the negative day in and day out. But instead what you could have said there was, more likely to succeed in a career. Or something, whatever it might be. So you could have made a few changes to that, it would have been a bit different. So that's, and these explanatory examples, you saw how we used them in a few of the before and afters that I showed you. So you can be very creative with your examples, but they're going to go a long way towards kind of normalizing human services, that we all use them and here's how. And also to kind of showing why and when we really need to invest in human services. So just one final slide, I think. I mentioned earlier that if you leave here today and you remember nothing else other than that, the value of human potential is really, really powerful. But if you only use that, it's only going to move the needle a little bit. But if you use all three frame elements together, like I said, Frameworks has never seen these kind of results before, ever. In 15 years, they've worked on a lot of different issues with a lot of different organizations. We know it works. We know it works. It requires kind of changing your mindset and a little bit of discipline to do it. So here's what we're trying to do. Move away from that narrow definition of human services to a much fuller picture of the sector and the work that you do. Really getting away from that charity model into you are a skilled, essential profession that should be paid accordingly. Off of the safety net for the vulnerable to everybody needs lots of different supports at different points in their life. And that's okay. And moving away from really just talking about the size of the problem and leading with solutions. So I hope that kind of what you've learned today really gives you some tools going forward as you think about advocacy and communications. Because I know all of you are really committed in the most grandest terms in changing the world. And that's the work that you do every day. You're really trying to change the world. You just need to change your brain.